There was no roar, no resistance, just a half-burned lion cub, too small to fight, too quiet to beg, pressing its face into the chest of a man who never expected to feel anything again. He didn't know why he bent down to lift it from the ashes. He only knew he couldn't leave it to die. What he didn't know, what none of us could have known, was that moment would bind them together for life, until the day he'd have to let go and watch the only creature that ever followed him walk away. The sky over northern Kenya looked wrong that morning, too pale, too still, like the world had forgotten how to breathe. A thin layer of dust hung in the air, turning the sunlight into something dull and tired. Even the wind, which usually never stopped moving across the scrubland, seemed to hold back as if it didn't want to disturb what had happened during the night. Gabriel Hart didn't believe in omens, not anymore. At 62, he had learned that life didn't send warnings the way people like to imagine. Things didn't happen because the universe was trying to teach you a lesson. Things happened because they happened. A storm arrived, a fire spread, a heart stopped beating, and you were left standing in the aftermath, trying to decide whether you were going to keep going. He stepped down from his battered white pickup truck and shut the door with a careful, controlled motion. The sound echoed strangely in the quiet. The research station behind him was small, just a cluster of weather-worn buildings and metal fencing at the edge of protected land. Nothing fancy, no glossy brochures, no tourists taking photos. It was a place for work, not for visitors. Gabriel's boots pressed into ash-gray soil as he walked toward the eastern boundary, where the ground dipped and rose in uneven waves. The fire had burned hard through here 2 nights ago, fueled by dry brush and the kind of wind that didn't care what it destroyed. It had been contained before it reached the station, but the smell still lingered. Smoke and something deeper beneath it, something that didn't wash away with time. He carried a small field kit over one shoulder. Old habit. A veterinarian's habit. He hadn't practiced in a proper clinic for years. In another life, he had been the kind of man who worked under bright surgical lights, with clean instruments lined up like soldiers and nurses waiting for his next instruction. In that life, he'd had a steady paycheck, good health insurance, and the kind of retirement plan people talked about like it was a promise. Now he had sunburned hands, a creaking knee, and a station that survived on grants and stubbornness. The world called it conservation. Paperwork called it wildlife management. Gabriel called it staying busy enough to keep his mind from wandering. He reached the burned section and stopped. The trees here weren't tall. They were more like tough, twisted survivors, acacia and scrub that fought for every inch of life. The fire had blackened their bark, stripped their branches bare, and left the ground looking like a forgotten battlefield. There were tracks in the ash, faint but readable to someone who knew how to look. Gazelle, warthog, hyena, and something heavier. Gabriel's gaze moved slowly across the landscape. He was checking for flare-ups, for injured animals, for anything that might have crawled out of the flames only to die quietly afterward. The station had a responsibility to document what the fire had done. Reports would be written, funding decisions would be made, and somewhere, far away in an air-conditioned office, someone would decide whether this place deserved another year of support. He hated that part, the part where suffering became numbers. But he still did the work. A buzz sounded in his pocket, his phone, weak signal catching a sliver of connection. He ignored it. Out here, the phone was mostly a useless object, except when it reminded him of things he didn't want to think about. Bills, emails, messages from people who meant well. He had left that world behind for a reason. Gabriel took another step forward, then froze. There was a shape ahead, half hidden by the rise of the ground, dark against darker soil. At first glance, it looked like a fallen tree trunk, but the curve of it was wrong. The way it lay was wrong. His throat tightened without permission. He started walking faster. The air smelled stronger here. Burned hair, burned flesh, and the sour metallic scent that clung to death. Gabriel had smelled it in barns, in roadside accidents, in places where animals didn't get a second chance. He told himself not to jump to conclusions. He told himself it could be anything. But he already knew. When he reached the top of the rise, the scene hit him like a physical blow. A lioness lay on her side in the ash. Her body was blackened in places, the fur burned down to the skin along her shoulder and flank. One foreleg was stretched forward, as if she had tried to crawl. Her head was angled toward the shallow dip, where the ground held a little more shade, a little more protection from the wind. Gabriel stood there, motionless, the field kit sliding down his shoulder until it thumped softly against his hip. For a moment, he didn't breathe. Lions weren't supposed to die like this. Not here. Not this close to the protected boundary. Not in silence, alone, like an animal nobody noticed until it was too late. He forced himself to move. Slowly, carefully, he stepped closer. He kept his eyes on her body, searching for any sign of movement, any rise and fall of breath. But there was none. The lioness's eyes were open, glazed, fixed on nothing. Gabriel swallowed hard. He had seen death so many times that he should have been numb to it. And yet it never became ordinary. It never became acceptable. He crouched down a few feet away. He didn't touch her. Not yet. There was a kind of respect in that distance, like giving the world a moment to admit what had happened. Then he heard it. Not a roar, not even a whimper. A sound so small and broken that it almost didn't exist. A thin, rasping breath that seemed to come from the ground itself. Gabriel's head snapped to the side. His eyes scanned the ash, the burned brush, the shallow hollow behind the lioness's ribs. For a second, he couldn't find the source. Then he saw movement, just a twitch, a shiver, a tiny shape, pressed against the lioness's belly. Gabriel's heart hammered in his chest. A cub? So small it looked unreal, like something that belonged in a different world. Its fur was caked with soot and mud, its ears flattened, its little body trembling in exhaustion. One side of its face was stained dark where the heat had singed the whiskers away. The cub's mouth opened slightly as it tried to pull air into lungs that didn't have the strength for it. It was alive, barely. Gabriel moved without thinking. He set his kit down and reached out, hands steady from decades of practice. The cub didn't fight him. It didn't even try to run. It only lifted its head weakly, and its eyes, too big for its face, too aware, locked onto Gabriel's. There was no fear in that stare, just something raw, something that didn't belong in a creature so young. Gabriel's hand slid beneath the cub's body, and he felt how light it was. Too light, skin and bone under dirty fur. The cub's body was hot, feverish, but the limbs felt cold at the tips. Shock, dehydration, burn injuries, and grief. Though Gabriel would have told anyone that grief was a human word, not an animal one, yet in that moment he couldn't think of anything else. The cub made a faint sound, like a breath caught in a throat. Gabriel held it closer to his chest, shielding it from the wind. His mind raced through options. He should call Zara. He should radio the station. He should wait for backup. But the cub was dying in his hands. There wasn't time for committee decisions. There wasn't time for a meeting or a risk assessment. This was the part of life where you either acted or you lived with what you didn't do. Gabriel stood up. The cub pressed against him like a fragile secret. He looked down at the lioness one last time. The way her body lay, between the cub and the open ground, told its own story. She had tried to shield it. She had stayed long enough to make sure it had a chance. Whatever she had been in life, hunter, mother, queen of her territory, she had ended as a wall between her child and the fire. Gabriel's jaw clenched. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, though he didn't know who he was speaking to. The lioness? The cub? Himself? Then he turned and walked back toward the truck. The cub's breathing fluttered against his shirt. Every few steps, its small body jerked with effort, like it was fighting for each breath, one at a time. Gabriel kept his arms tight around it, adjusting his grip so the cub's head stayed upright. He moved faster, boots crunching through ash. Halfway back, his phone buzzed again. He didn't look. He didn't care if it was a message about grant deadlines or some expensive medical bill from the past that still found its way to him like a ghost. None of that mattered in the face of a living thing trying not to slip away. When he reached the truck, he opened the passenger door and laid the cub on an old blanket he kept there for emergencies. The cub curled instinctively into the fabric, searching for warmth the way it would have searched for its mother. Gabriel's hands hovered over it for a moment. He had worked with big cats before: sedation protocols, wound care, emergency procedures. He knew the dangers. A lion was not a dog, not a pet, not a companion. And yet he also knew something else. A cub this young didn't survive alone, not here, not after a fire. Gabriel climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The truck coughed, then roared to life. Dust rose behind the tires as he turned back toward the station. The road was barely a road, just a worn track through scrub and stone. The truck bounced hard, and Gabriel winced as his knee protested. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other reaching over now and then to steady the cub when the bumps got too rough. The cub's eyes stayed open, watching him, as if it was memorizing his face, as if it was making a decision. By the time he reached the station gates, the sun had climbed higher, bleaching the horizon white. Zara was outside near the water tank, adjusting a valve. She turned at the sound of the truck, shading her eyes with one hand. Then she saw what Gabriel was carrying. Her expression changed instantly, shock first, then alarm, then something softer that she tried to hide. "Gabriel," she said, voice low, careful. "What did you do?" He didn't answer right away. He walked past her, straight into the small treatment room, a converted storage space with a metal table, basic supplies, and a humming mini fridge for medication. He laid the cub down gently, like it was made of glass. Zara followed, closing the door behind them. The cub tried to stand. Its legs wobbled, then gave out. It collapsed with a tiny thud and didn't have the strength to lift its head again. Zara inhaled sharply. "It's a lion cub," she whispered, like naming it made it more real. "Where's the mother?" Gabriel's voice came out rough. "She didn't make it." Zara's eyes flicked to the cub's burned fur, the cracked pads of its paws, the soot around its nose. She pressed her lips together, fighting the instinct to step back. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked. Gabriel opened his kit with practiced hands. "It means it needs fluids, now." Zara didn't move. "It means if the wrong person finds out, they'll shut this station down. It means the board will call it a liability. It means the insurance people will ask questions we can't answer." Gabriel pulled on gloves. His hands didn't shake. "Then we answer later." Zara stared at him for a long second, searching his face like she was trying to see if he had finally lost whatever sense he had left. Gabriel didn't look back at her. He was focused on the cub's breathing, on the heat in its skin, on the way its chest rose unevenly. "I've watched too many things die," he said quietly. "Not today." The cub made a faint sound, almost like a sigh. Gabriel found a small syringe, filled it with warmed electrolyte solution, and slowly brought it to the cub's mouth. At first, the cub didn't respond. Then its tongue moved weakly, and it swallowed. Once, twice, a tiny, stubborn act of survival. Zara's shoulders loosened by a fraction. Gabriel continued, slow and careful, feeding it drop by drop. He could almost feel the cub's body resisting death the way a person resists sleep when they're afraid they won't wake up again. Minutes passed. The cub's breathing steadied slightly. Its eyes blinked once, heavy with exhaustion. And then, without warning, the cub lifted its paw. Not in aggression, not in fear. It reached out and pressed its soot-stained paw against Gabriel's wrist, as if it needed to make sure he was real, as if it was saying, in the only language it had left, "Don't leave." Gabriel froze. Something in his chest tightened, sharp and unexpected. He had spent years convincing himself he didn't need anyone. That attachment was dangerous. That love was just another kind of loss waiting to happen. But a dying lion cub didn't know anything about his rules. It only knew the warmth of a hand that had lifted it from ashes. Zara watched the moment happen. Her eyes softened despite herself. "This is how it starts," she murmured, almost to herself. Gabriel didn't answer. He looked down at the cub, at the small body, the burned fur, the stubborn eyes that refused to close completely. And in the quiet of that little room, with the smell of smoke still clinging to everything, Gabriel understood something he didn't want to understand. Saving the cub was the easy part. Living with what came after would be the real storm. He fed the cub again, just one more drop, and whispered the only promise he could give. "You're not alone," he said. "Not today." Outside, the land stayed silent, but inside that room, something had begun, something that would follow Gabriel Hart for the rest of his life, step for step, like a shadow that refused to let go. By the second day, the cub's breathing was less fragile. It no longer gasped like it was chasing life one breath at a time. Still, Gabriel Hart knew the line between survival and suffering could disappear without warning. His hands moved carefully, out of habit, out of reverence, as he changed the makeshift dressing on the cub's left hind leg. The burns there were deep but not infected. Not yet. Ghost, as he had started calling the cub in his mind, lay still throughout the procedure, not paralyzed by pain or fear, but watching. It was the same look that had followed him since the moment he carried the animal into the station, a quiet, unsettling stare, like it saw everything and said nothing. The eyes weren't typical of a lion cub, too calm, too old. Gabriel wiped his forehead with the inside of his elbow. The treatment room was hot, the small generator outside wheezing from overuse. Zara had been silent most of the morning. She stayed in the corner, pretending to organize samples, but he could feel her attention locked onto him and the cub like a taut string. "Are you really going to keep it here?" she asked eventually, her voice low but steady. Gabriel didn't look up. "For now. You're making it dependent. I'm making it live." Zara set down a clipboard. "That's not what I meant. You know better than anyone what happens when wild animals imprint too deeply. You taught me that." Gabriel turned slightly toward her, the syringe in his hand half full of a nutrient mix. "And you know what happens when we do nothing?" She didn't argue, not directly, but her eyes said what her mouth didn't. This isn't just an animal. This is something else. Gabriel finished feeding Ghost and leaned back in the chair. The cub gave a soft noise, not a growl, not a mewl, just a sound, like breath meeting memory. Then slowly it shifted its small body forward and pressed its muzzle against Gabriel's boot. Zara exhaled, more like a sigh than a breath. "It's already following you," she murmured. That night, Gabriel moved a cot into the treatment room. Not because he had to. He could have monitored the cub from the main building, could have used the cameras and alarms, but because he wanted to be close. It was a mistake. He knew that. Attachment was dangerous. It clouded decisions, blurred lines. But as he lay there in the half-dark, listening to the soft rustle of the cub shifting in its blanket, he felt something unfamiliar. Stillness. Not the cold silence that had settled into him after losing his wife years ago, not the forced quiet of living far from the world he once knew. This was different. This was peace. He didn't sleep much. Every few hours the cub stirred. Gabriel would rise, check vitals, offer a sip of water, adjust the fan so the room didn't overheat. Around 3 a.m., as the wind picked up outside and dust whispered against the metal siding, the cub did something unexpected. It crawled from its blanket and climbed onto the edge of his cot. Gabriel remained perfectly still. The cub moved clumsily, its balance still off, hind leg trembling, but it managed to reach the space beside his chest. And then it lay down, its breath hitched once, then settled. Its heartbeat was a rapid thump against Gabriel's ribs. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't dare acknowledge the raw, painful warmth blooming in his chest. Ghost fell asleep with one paw on his shoulder. By dawn, the sky turned gold behind the acacia trees. Gabriel was awake before the light fully arrived. He eased off the cot and covered Ghost with the edge of the blanket. Then he went outside, blinking against the harsh sun. Zara was already up, boiling water over the camp stove. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, handing him a cup without waiting for an answer. Gabriel took it with a nod. He climbed into bed. Like a dog? Like a shadow. They sat in silence for a moment. Birds called in the distance, the kind that returned quickly after fire, as if nature couldn't help but reclaim itself. "I know I shouldn't be letting this happen," Gabriel admitted. "But something in him, it's not just survival, it's choice." Zara sipped her tea, her brow furrowed. "You can't raise a lion, Gabriel, even if it acts tame. Sooner or later, the wild comes back." He knew she was right, but when they returned to the treatment room an hour later, they found Ghost waiting by the door, tail curled around his body, eyes fixed on the spot where Gabriel had stood. Later that afternoon, Gabriel opened the door to let in some air. Ghost limped after him without hesitation, stepping into the sunlight as if he belonged there. His ears twitched at every sound, his nose lifted to catch the scent of wind. Then he turned and walked behind Gabriel in perfect step, his head barely reaching the man's knee. Not once did he stray, not once did he roar, just followed. The days passed and Ghost grew stronger. His fur started to regain its softness. His appetite returned with a hunger that demanded fresh meat rather than the milk substitutes Gabriel had been preparing. Every hour he wasn't sleeping, he was watching. Gabriel, the sky, the fence line, the birds, the world. And always following. To the generator room, to the supply shed, even to the compost pit where Gabriel buried a broken antelope carcass. The station's other workers started calling Ghost the Phantom Cub. Always present, never loud. Always behind Gabriel's left shoulder, like a shadow too quiet to notice until you turned. One evening, as Gabriel refilled the water trough behind the main building, he noticed Zara standing nearby, arms crossed. "He doesn't act like a cub anymore," she said. "He acts like something older. Something watching." Gabriel didn't respond, not because he disagreed, but because he didn't know how to explain what he felt. That Ghost was more than a cub, that he had seen something in the fire, something Gabriel couldn't begin to understand. And maybe, just maybe, he had chosen to live not because of instinct, but because of him. One morning, Gabriel had to drive out beyond the station's perimeter to check on a damaged trail cam. The job would take an hour at most. He told Zara to monitor Ghost, who had been sleeping after breakfast. He returned 40 minutes later to find Ghost standing outside the gates, pacing. "How did he get out?" Gabriel asked, heart racing. Zara shrugged. "He woke up and didn't see you, broke through the mesh with his teeth." Gabriel looked down at the cub, who now stared up at him as if demanding an explanation. "He's imprinting," Zara said. you're not just his rescuer anymore. That night, Gabriel found himself searching online for information about lion behavior, bonding, and early attachment trauma. He skimmed articles about wildlife rehabilitation, emergency veterinary care, pet insurance for exotic animals, even though he knew that last one was absurd. But still, he searched, just in case. Because part of him already knew something dangerous and beautiful had begun, a bond that no field manual or ethics policy could explain. Ghost didn't act like he was being cared for. He acted like he had chosen someone. Gabriel Hart, the man who once believed he'd already used up all his second chances, was being followed. Not out of fear, not because of food, but because in a world scorched by loss, the cub had looked at him and seen something worth walking toward. By the end of the third week, Ghost was no longer a fragile bundle of bone and ash. His body filled out, muscles sharpening beneath fur that was slowly turning the soft gold of wild lions. The burns had healed better than Gabriel expected. Some would scar, especially the long one across his flank, but he would survive. More than that, he was thriving. Thriving and watching. The station's routine hadn't changed much. Gabriel still checked fencing, cataloged animal movements, and monitored trail cams that stretched across 50 miles of unpredictable terrain. But now he did it with a shadow. Ghost followed him everywhere. Not in the frantic way a puppy does, desperate for attention, but with quiet precision. If Gabriel stopped, Ghost stopped. If he walked, Ghost padded along behind. When Gabriel sat beneath the awning behind the supply shed to sip his coffee in the morning, Ghost curled beside his chair, head resting on Gabriel's boot. The others at the station had started taking pictures, not for research or record-keeping, but because it felt unreal. A lion cub, barely 3 months old, trailing an old man across dusty paths like a sentinel. The image spread among nearby conservation teams, drawing in questions and a few raised eyebrows. Zara tried to explain it rationally. Trauma bonding, early imprinting, social confusion. But Gabriel didn't try to explain it at all. He just accepted it. The nickname came from one of the local field techs, a young man from Nairobi who only visited twice a month to service equipment. After watching Ghost pace silently behind Gabriel one afternoon, he shook his head and muttered, "Like a ghost, that one." The name stuck. Ghost, and Gabriel, though he never said it aloud, started whispering it sometimes, when the cub was curled in sleep, when he had to calm him during a storm, when the nightmares still came, and Ghost nosed his hand until he woke. One night the wind howled across the flatlands, rattling the metal roofs of the outbuildings. Gabriel couldn't sleep. He stepped outside into the brittle cold, stars above like shattered glass. Ghost followed, as always, padding beside him without leash or command. Gabriel sat on the porch and looked out over the distant hills, the ones untouched by fire, where lions still roamed free. Ghost pressed close, curling against his hip like a dog too big for its own body. "You don't belong here," Gabriel whispered into the night. "And you don't know it yet." Ghost blinked slowly, unbothered. Gabriel didn't expect an answer. He didn't even expect understanding. But in that moment, it felt like he was speaking less to the cub and more to himself. The next morning brought change. A report came in from a nearby drone survey. 3 illegal poaching camps had been spotted less than 20 kilometers from the reserve edge. One already had signs of lion activity, tracks, blood, a torn hide. The message was clear. The Yowish region wasn't safe, not even within the station boundaries. Gabriel didn't tell Ghost, obviously. But that night, Ghost refused to sleep in the enclosure Gabriel had built for him. He paced, he growled, not at Gabriel, but at the wind, at the scent, at something Gabriel couldn't see. That was the first time Gabriel considered what would happen if Ghost ever decided to stop following and start leading. A few days later, the theory was tested. It began like any other afternoon, Gabriel running power tests on the solar array near the southern edge of the camp. Zara had gone into the nearby village to resupply. Only one technician remained, and he was inside the main building cataloging footage. Gabriel worked in silence, screwdriver in hand, sweat gathering along his brow beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Ghost lay nearby, eyes half-lidded in the sun. He looked calm, lazy even, until the wind changed. It happened fast, so fast Gabriel barely registered the shift before. Ghost was on his feet, teeth bared. A man emerged from the trees beyond the boundary line, stumbling toward the station. His clothes were tattered, his eyes wild. Gabriel stood instinctively, calling out, unsure if the man was injured or lost. But Ghost didn't wait for answers. He leapt forward in a low, silent sprint. No roar, no noise at all. The man screamed and fell backward, arms raised, babbling in Swahili. Gabriel shouted, calling Ghost back, his voice hoarse. The cub stopped just short of the man, chest low to the ground, tail rigid, growling with a sound so deep it didn't belong in anything that size. Gabriel got there seconds later, breath burning, pulling Ghost back by the scruff like he weighed nothing. The cub resisted only slightly, muscles tense. The man on the ground trembled, clearly terrified. He wasn't a poacher. He wasn't armed. He was a local farmer who had wandered too close while tracking a lost goat. Gabriel apologized, offered water, helped him back to the road. But the damage was done. That night, Zara returned and listened carefully to the story. "This is what I warned you about," she said. "He's not a dog, Gabriel. He's not a pet. And the world's going to remind you of that, over and over." Gabriel nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Later, as Ghost slept beside the cot in the treatment room, Gabriel sat in the dark and stared at the wall. The cub had crossed a line today, not out of cruelty, but instinct. And while the image of a lion following a man made for beautiful video footage and possibly viral stories about unbreakable bonds between human and beast, the reality was starting to crack. Gabriel opened his laptop and searched for something he had been avoiding. Rehabilitation centers for lions in Kenya. Wildlife sanctuary reintegration programs. He read through results, some shady, others promising. One stood out, a privately funded reserve, several hours, north with semi-wild environments where orphaned predators were reintroduced to natural behaviors. The program was designed specifically for young lions. It had veterinary supervision, species-specific diet plans, and the backing of international animal welfare organizations. It also had a waiting list. Gabriel bookmarked the site, then closed the laptop. He looked down at Ghost. The cub twitched in his sleep, paws moving like he was dreaming of running. Gabriel remembered something Zara had said the week before. Eventually, the wild comes back. The next morning, Gabriel took Ghost for a walk along the fence line. It was early, and the sun had barely broken over the ridge. Ghost trotted beside him, silent as always. When they reached the northeast corner, where the trail camera had once caught a family of hyenas dragging off a carcass, Gabriel sat on a rock. Ghost sat too. They stayed there a long time. Eventually, Gabriel reached out and touched Ghost's ear, the one still scarred from the fire. "You're not mine," he said softly. "I know that." Ghost didn't move, but his tail thumped once against the dirt. That night, Gabriel couldn't sleep. He paced the walkway behind the station, watched the stars. At some point, Ghost rose and followed, padding behind like he had done since the first day. At one point, Gabriel turned suddenly, and Ghost almost bumped into his leg. They looked at each other, the man and the lion, both too quiet, both holding something back. Ghost didn't blink. Gabriel sighed, turning back toward the treatment building. "Come on, then," he said. "You always do." And Ghost followed. It happened in the middle of a windless afternoon, the kind of heat that made metal too hot to touch and bent the horizon in waves. Gabriel had taken Ghost down to the riverbed, dry this time of year, but still good for training the cub's balance on uneven rocks. Ghost, now nearly as tall as Gabriel's waist, leapt from stone to stone with growing precision. His frame had filled out, not yet bulky, but no longer childlike. The clumsy movements had been replaced by something more deliberate, more watchful. That's when the sound came, distant, low, and unmistakable. A lion's roar. It echoed from beyond the ridge, maybe 5 kilometers off, muted by distance, but still heavy with authority. Ghost froze mid-step. His ears swiveled. His body went still. Gabriel stood, shading his eyes, scanning the horizon for movement. Nothing but dust and silence. But Ghost didn't move. He stared toward the ridge, muscles tight, tail lowered, but not in fear. Gabriel called softly, "Come on. Ghost, let's go." Ghost didn't follow. Instead, he took one slow step toward the sound. That was the first time Gabriel truly felt it, that something was shifting between them, that whatever had held Ghost tethered to him, willingly, was being tested by something older and deeper. The wild was calling. Later that day, back at the station, Zara found Gabriel sitting at the supply shed steps, eyes distant. "You heard it too," she said. Gabriel nodded. "He's changing," she added. "You feel it, don't you?" "He's growing," Gabriel replied. "That's not what I said." Gabriel looked down at his hands. The skin was darker now, from sun and years. His knuckles ached more than they used to. The lines on his palms were deeper. And yet somehow the weight pressing on his chest wasn't physical. He wasn't afraid of what Ghost might become. He was afraid of what Ghost might leave behind. 2 days later, Dr. Elias Mbaye arrived. A tall, sharp-eyed man in his 50s, he carried a government badge, a Ph.D. from Nairobi, and the kind of calm that made people uncomfortable. He didn't shake hands. He scanned, observed, evaluated. He had come in response to a request Zara had sent weeks earlier, a quiet plea for outside eyes. Gabriel hadn't objected, not outwardly, but Ghost did. From the moment Elias stepped onto station grounds, Ghost watched him with unblinking suspicion. He didn't growl. He didn't bare teeth. He simply placed himself between Gabriel and the visitor, shoulders squared, posture alert. Elias took note. "That's not typical lion behavior," he said. "No," Gabriel replied. "He's not typical." The examination lasted nearly 2 hours. Elias took samples, measurements, observed muscle development and behavior patterns. Ghost tolerated the intrusion with regal patience, only flinching once when Elias reached near his scarred flank. "He's healthy," Elias said finally. "Exceptionally so, considering his injuries, strong, alert, socially attached." Gabriel nodded, hopeful, but then Elias added, "Too attached?" Zara, standing nearby, lowered her gaze. Gabriel crossed his arms. "You mean to me?" "I mean to humans, but yes, to you specifically. He follows you, mimics your rhythms. He eats when you eat, sleeps near your breathing. That's not sustainable." Gabriel's voice was calm, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. "What do you suggest?" Elias didn't hesitate. "Transfer. Sanctuary up north. Semi-wild reintegration. We've done this before. It's the best shot he has." "And if I say no?" Elias raised a brow. "Then eventually he'll hurt someone. Not out of malice, out of confusion. And they'll kill him for it. You know that." The silence that followed was long and brittle. That night, Gabriel didn't sleep. He sat on the cot, watching Ghost doze nearby. The cub's chest rose and fell, with the slow rhythm of trust. Occasionally his paw twitched, as if dreaming of running. Gabriel whispered, "Do you know what they're asking me to do?" Ghost stirred but didn't wake. Gabriel kept talking, not expecting answers. "They want me to give you up. Send you to a place with other lions. Let them train you. Teach you to stop acting like you belong beside me." Ghost breathed deeply. Gabriel whispered, "But you do, don't you?" At sunrise, Gabriel made a call. He used the satellite line reserved for emergencies and requested a transfer application to the Amani Wildlife Reintegration Center. He told himself it wasn't a decision yet, just an inquiry, just information. But somewhere deep down, he knew. The wild had called, and this time Ghost had answered. A week later, the proof arrived. It was early evening. Zara and Gabriel were reviewing data when a motion alert triggered from one of the boundary cams. Gabriel opened the feed expecting to see a jackal or maybe a giraffe, curious as always. Instead, he saw 3 lions, adult, wild, confident. They were patrolling the outer edge of the station's property, noses down, moving in slow formation. A pride, 1 male, 2 females. Ghost watched the footage with them. He sat perfectly still, eyes locked to the screen. And then he growled. Not a warning, not fear. A recognition. Later that night, Ghost didn't return to the treatment room. Gabriel found him at the eastern fence, lying in the dark, eyes fixed toward the hills, waiting. The next morning, Gabriel submitted the final paperwork. 3 days from now, the truck would come. A secure transport. Vets and handlers. A full transition team. Zara stood beside him as he emailed the confirmation. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "I know," he replied. But in his heart, something cracked. Because Ghost had followed him through fire, through pain, through healing. He had trusted him not just with survival, but with belonging. And now, Gabriel was choosing to break that trust. For the first time since the fire, Gabriel felt like a coward. The night before the truck arrived, he couldn't bear to sleep inside. He took his cot out beneath the stars. Ghost followed, as always, lying beside him, their bodies close but their paths diverging. Gabriel didn't say much, only this: "I hope you remember me, even when you don't need me." Ghost didn't make a sound. But in the early hours of dawn, before the world stirred, he stood, walked over to Gabriel, and gently pressed his forehead to the man's chest. No roar, only silence, only goodbye. The truck arrived just after sunrise. Dust billowed in its wake as it rumbled down the worn track toward the research station. It was larger than Gabriel expected, military-style suspension, reinforced frame, a custom cage mounted in the rear. Everything about it screamed efficiency, safety, finality. Ghost was pacing before the first tire hit gravel. Gabriel watched from the steps of the main building, arms crossed over his chest. Zara stood beside him, silent. No one said a word. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been whispered in the long hours of the night before. Ghost didn't growl when the handlers stepped out. He didn't run. He simply stood there, watching the strangers with that same unreadable calm he'd carried since the day Gabriel found him in the ash. The team moved with quiet professionalism. 2 men, 1 woman, and a veterinarian Gabriel had spoken with on the phone, Dr. Lena Okoro. She gave him a polite nod as she approached. Tablet in, hand. "He's in excellent condition," she said. "Better than we expected. You've done good work." Gabriel didn't look away from Ghost. "He did the hard part?" Lena smiled gently, then gestured to the cage. "We'll sedate him lightly," she explained. "Just enough to ease the transition. He won't be fully unconscious. It'll feel more like falling asleep on a long drive." Gabriel nodded once. He appreciated the kindness in her tone, the professionalism. But it didn't make the knot in his stomach loosen. Ghost circled twice, then stopped beside Gabriel. He looked up, golden eyes sharp and steady. Then, without prompting, he sat. Gabriel knelt slowly, placing a hand on Ghost's shoulder. "Easy, boy," he whispered. "Just a ride, that's all." The injection was quick, behind the front leg, beneath a fold of skin. Ghost didn't flinch. He just kept watching Gabriel as the sedative began to take hold. His eyes blinked slower. His breath deepened. He tried to stay upright. Gabriel placed both arms around him, steadying him as he wobbled. Ghost leaned forward, resting his forehead against Gabriel's chest. One last time. Then the handlers lifted him gently and carried him into the truck. The cage door shut with a soft click, not loud, not cruel, just final. Gabriel stood alone as the truck pulled away, Zara at his side, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You did what was right," she said. Gabriel didn't answer, because in that moment, right didn't feel like the point. That night, the station felt empty. It wasn't just the silence, it was the absence of a presence. Gabriel kept glancing toward doorways, expecting paw steps, expecting golden eyes. Nothing came. He couldn't sleep. He walked the station perimeter 3 times, sat at the old generator shed for an hour, stared at the stars. Around 2 in the morning, he found himself in the treatment room. The blanket Ghost used was still folded, on the cot. Gabriel sat beside it, ran a hand across the worn fabric. He remembered the first time Ghost had pressed his paw against him, the night he almost didn't make it. He remembered the way the cub had followed him, not because he was trained, but because he had chosen to. That was the thing no one talked about in wildlife rehab or veterinary school. Choice. Love didn't always look like attachment. Sometimes it looked like trust, and sometimes trust meant letting go. Gabriel leaned back in the chair, eyes burning. When dawn broke, he was still there. The days passed slowly. Zara took over field duties while Gabriel sorted through station files, organizing inventory, updating logs. The distraction helped, but only on the surface. Everything reminded him of Ghost. The enclosure, now empty, collected dust. The path they used to walk had fresh prints, but none of them paw-shaped. Gabriel told himself the ache would fade. It didn't. 3 days after the key transport, he received the first update. A video link from Dr. Okoro. Ghost had arrived safely at the Imani Wildlife Reintegration Center. He was alert, feeding well, and housed in a transitional habitat with sight and sound access to other lions. The footage showed Ghost lying beneath a tree, eyes half-lidded but aware. In the background, a female lion moved past the fence line, pausing briefly to look his way. Ghost didn't move. He just watched. The next day, a letter came, handwritten, from Dr. Okoro. She explained that Ghost was showing typical signs of disorientation, calling out at night, pacing, refusing direct interaction with handlers. But she also noted that he responded positively to recordings of Gabriel's voice, which they played during feedings. "He still associates you with safety," she wrote, "but he's learning to listen to others." Gabriel folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Then, on impulse, he stepped outside and recorded a short voice memo. "You're doing good, kid. Keep watching. Keep listening. It's okay not to follow now." He sent it that night. 2 weeks later, another video arrived. This time, Ghost was walking beside one of the handlers, not following, but matching pace. His ears twitched at every sound. His gaze tracked the other lions with growing interest. He didn't look back. Gabriel watched the footage twice, then closed the laptop. He stood at the edge of the porch, hands resting on the railing, eyes scanning the empty horizon. For the first time in months, he walked the boundary line without looking over his shoulder. But even now, even here, the memory of Paws' steps followed. And in that memory there was no roar, only silence, only eyes, only love, choosing the road forward. The first thing Gabriel noticed in the new video was the scar. It ran across Ghost's right shoulder, pale against the gold of his maturing coat. The same scar Gabriel had cleaned every morning with warm saline and covered with gauze when the cub was too small to lift his own head. Now it was just part of him, faded but visible, like proof of where he'd been, of who he used to be. In the footage, Ghost was walking slowly beside two other lions, adolescents like him, one female, one male. His steps were deliberate, not cautious, but thoughtful, as if each move still held the weight of memory. He paused to sniff a branch, then sat under a baobab tree while the others continued ahead. Not alone, but not fully among them either. Gabriel paused the video. The image froze with Ghost's eyes facing the camera, not directly, but close enough that Gabriel felt seen. He closed the laptop and stepped outside. The sun was just rising, casting thin gold over the horizon. Wind moved across the dry plain, brushing over empty trails where lion tracks used to sit beside his boot prints. He missed the sound of Paws behind him. He missed the presence. Zara joined him a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one without speaking, then sat on the steps of the porch beside him. "You know he's doing okay, right?" she said. Gabriel nodded. "You don't believe it?" "I believe it," he said. "I just remember." Zara sipped her coffee and looked out across the flat, empty land. "He's figuring it out," she said quietly. "But he's still looking for you. Lena says he wakes up sometimes and walks to the edge of the enclosure, like he expects to see your truck." Gabriel didn't respond. That night, a new email arrived. No video this time. Just a short message from Dr. Okoro. "He made contact today." Gabriel stared at the screen. One of the older females at the sanctuary, an experienced matriarch who had raised orphaned cubs before, had approached Ghost and touched her muzzle to his. A gesture of welcome, of trust. Ghost had hesitated, then responded. They had laid side by side for nearly an hour. Gabriel reread the message 3 times. Then he turned off the computer and walked outside, staring up at the stars, breath shallow in the cool air. Somewhere in a different part of Kenya, Ghost wasn't sleeping alone. And that changed everything. 2 days later, the phone rang. It was Lena. "Gabriel," she said, voice light but direct, "we're seeing a shift." "In what way?" "In all the right ones. He's showing social behaviors, mimicking feeding habits, playing in controlled contact zones, even initiating greeting signals. He's still watchful, still a little aloof, but that's not unusual for his history. What matters is he's choosing proximity. He's not hiding anymore." Gabriel closed his eyes. The wind outside rattled the shutters. "And the older lions?" he asked. "They're accepting him," she said. "Slowly, but it's happening." There was a pause. "Would you like to see it?" she asked. Gabriel hesitated. "I'm not sure I should." "He remembers you," she said. "But he's also moving on. That's not a bad thing. That's what you wanted." "I'm not sure what I want anymore." Lena didn't push. A week passed before he made the call, and when he did, Lena made the arrangements. "No direct contact," she reminded him. "He's in a delicate stage. You'll observe from behind the boundary wall, quietly. No calls, no approach." Gabriel agreed. The journey north was longer than he remembered. He hadn't left the station in months. The world beyond it felt louder, faster. He traveled in an old Land Rover, arranged through the sanctuary's donor-funded outreach program. Along the way, he saw roads lined with signs for ecotourism resorts, luxury safari tents, even wildlife. Photography packages. He thought of Ghost and how far he'd come, from a soot-covered cub barely breathing to something people might one day point cameras at and marvel over. He didn't want that for him. He wanted freedom, real freedom, not enclosure with a view. When he arrived, the staff greeted him politely, respectfully. Dr. Okoro met him at the perimeter walkway, handing him a visitor's pass and a set of binoculars. "He's out by the western flats today," she said. "Feeding area near the tree cluster. You can observe from the blind." Gabriel nodded. He said nothing. The blind was a simple wooden structure, camouflaged with netting, and set at a raised angle overlooking the flats. From there, Gabriel could see the entire half-acre enclosure, sparse trees, scrub brush, a shallow man-made waterhole. At first, there was nothing. Then movement. Ghost emerged from behind a low bush, followed by the same female lion from the video. They walked side by side, neither dominant, neither submissive, just present. The female rubbed her head gently against his flank. Ghost didn't pull away. Gabriel raised the binoculars and studied him closely. He was bigger now, stronger. His gait had weight, confidence. But the scar was still there, a part of him that would never change. Ghost lay down beneath a tree. The female settled beside him. He closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, from contentment, from belonging. Gabriel watched for a long time, hours maybe. Time didn't move the same way in places like this. At one point, Ghost raised his head, ears twitching. His eyes scanned the area, slow, deliberate. And for one breathless moment, Gabriel thought maybe, just maybe, he was looking for him. Then Ghost laid his head back down and didn't look again. That night, back at the guest housing near the sanctuary entrance, Gabriel couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, watching the wind move through the tall grass. Ghost wasn't alone anymore, and that meant Gabriel didn't need to be near him for him to survive. But something inside still ached, not with regret, not with doubt, with pride, the kind that comes from knowing you helped build something, then stepped aside to let it grow. He opened his phone, found the old recording he'd sent during Ghost's first week at the center, the one where his voice said, softly, "You're doing good, kid. Keep watching. Keep listening." He listened to it once more. Then he smiled. Ghost didn't need him anymore. And somehow, that was the greatest gift he'd ever been given. Gabriel returned to the station on a Wednesday. The ride back was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't ask for conversation. The wind through the window, the steady hum of tires on gravel. That was enough. The driver, a local man named Eli, didn't speak unless spoken to, and Gabriel appreciated the silence more than he expected. As they pulled into the station, the same dust rolled up behind the tires, curling in the heat. Zara was already outside, arms crossed, sunglasses catching the late afternoon glare. "Looks like you made it," she said as Gabriel stepped out of the vehicle. "I always do." Zara studied his face. "You okay?" Gabriel gave a small shrug. "He is?" She nodded, didn't push. Just walked with him toward the buildings, each of them stepping into the quiet, like slipping back into old shoes. Inside, the station looked unchanged. Same notes pinned to the wall, same cracked tile by the sink, same creaking chair in the corner where Ghost used. To curl up, tail twitching in dreams, only lions understood. Gabriel sat at the desk and opened his laptop. Emails blinked in from colleagues, researchers, a few university students who wanted data on migration patterns. There was one advertisement for wildlife drone services, flagged as high priority with keywords like drone camera footage and professional tracking solutions. He skimmed, flagged it for later. Nothing personal, nothing from Ghost's new world. That night he lay in bed listening to the wind push against the shutters. It was different now, emptier. He didn't expect footsteps, didn't feel the weight of a body settling beside him. But in the center of his chest there was still the echo of a paw print. Faint? Permanent? At dawn he walked the perimeter alone, boots over the same worn path, the same stretches of fence, the same termite mounds and scattered tufts of dry grass. But there was no soft rhythm beside him, no breath just behind his heel, no tail brushing his leg, only the sound of his own footsteps. Zara joined him halfway through the circuit. "He looked good," she said. Gabriel nodded. "Stronger. Happy? Settled." Zara looked down at the trail, then back at him. "You think he'd recognize you if he saw you again?" Gabriel didn't answer right away. He stopped walking, turned his face toward the wind, and closed his eyes. "I think he already said goodbye." That afternoon, a supply drone passed overhead. Gabriel watched it from the shade of the shed roof. The technology had gotten more advanced, faster, quieter. The station used them now for everything, delivering meds, tracking herds, even capturing high-resolution footage for donor reports. The operator had included a file with the last delivery, wildlife footage from the sanctuary zone where Ghost now roamed. It had been collected without anyone requesting it. Just a camera doing its job. Gabriel clicked play. The feed was clear, 4K, perfect frame rate, stabilized even in wind. A small pride moved across the brush, 3 adolescents, 2 older females. The lion stopped at the edge of a watering hole, paws dusted with ochre, eyes alert. Then Ghost entered the frame. He wasn't at the rear of the group. He was leading. His steps were slow, confident, unhurried. He moved to the water first, lowered his head, drank. The others waited, followed. He turned, looked out across the flatland. Gabriel paused the video. It hit him all at once that the little cub who once followed him through ash and fire now moved like he belonged to the land itself. No longer seeking protection, no longer walking behind. That night, Gabriel sat outside longer than usual. Stars climbed above the hills, scattered and unshaken. The old acacia trees whispered in the wind. At some point, Zara joined him, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "It's quieter these days," she said. "Quieter can be good." They sat in silence for a while. Then Gabriel said, "You ever think about the way they let go? Animals?" "Yeah." Zara tilted her head. "I think they do it better than we do." Gabriel gave a tired smile. "That's probably true." He didn't talk about the dream he'd had the night before, the one where Ghost walked past him without stopping, without looking back, and disappeared into the tall grass. And yet, even in the dream, there had been no sadness, only distance and peace. In the following weeks, Gabriel threw himself into the work: field checks, camera maintenance, habitat mapping. He recorded migration data, repaired a broken solar panel, filed overdue reports. The rhythm helped. And in that rhythm, he found a kind of healing. One morning, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a single photo. Ghost. Lying in the grass beside 2 younger cubs, one paw draped over the back of the smaller male. Behind him, the outline of the sanctuary hills. A note on the back in Lena's handwriting: "He's mentoring the new orphans. Shows patience, confidence. He's becoming what they need." Gabriel ran a thumb over the image, traced the outline of Ghost's face. The cub was gone. But something greater had taken his place. That afternoon, Gabriel went out to the old trail where they used to walk. No purpose, no clipboard, just a walk. At the far edge of the property, beneath a crooked acacia, he knelt and scratched something into the dirt with a stick. Just 3 words. "You led me." Then he stood and walked back alone. But this time, the emptiness didn't feel like loss. It felt like love, carried forward, not behind. It had been nearly 6 months since Gabriel last saw Ghost in person. The days moved slower now, not out of grief, but out of quiet acceptance. The station settled into its old rhythm, and Gabriel followed suit. He still walked the perimeter, still checked cameras, still drank his coffee before the sun was fully up. But some part of him moved differently now, as if calibrated by the weight of having let go. He hadn't expected another letter, but it came in late August, tucked inside a brown envelope with no markings other than a small handwritten note across the seal. Thought you might want to see this. Inside was a photograph, printed on high-quality stock. It showed Ghost, larger than Gabriel had ever seen him, his mane just beginning to rise around the edges of his neck, no longer a cub, not yet a king. He was standing beside a shallow riverbed, one paw mid-step, head turned slightly toward the lens. And beside him, 2 lion cubs, tiny, golden, and wide-eyed. The note on the back read, "He's not their father, but he acts like one." Gabriel stared at the image for a long time. Then he set it down, walked outside, and stood beneath the half-bent acacia where the trail forked west. The sun hung low. The wind curled softly around his boots. He didn't smile, but he felt something lift. A few days later, Zara brought a visitor, a young wildlife filmmaker named Callum, a London graduate working on a documentary about animal rehabilitation and the hidden human stories behind conservation work. He had heard about Ghost through a small article published in a wildlife research journal. He had found the footage, then the photos, then the whispers. He had come looking for the man the lion had once followed. Gabriel agreed to speak, reluctantly. They sat under the awning behind the equipment shed, the same place where Ghost used to nap in the shade. Callum asked, "Did you ever train him?" Gabriel shook his head. "I didn't have to. What do you think he saw in you?" "I was there." "That's all?" Gabriel looked out across the brush. "Sometimes it's enough." Callum recorded the interview on a small camera. The footage wouldn't air for another year, maybe longer, but Gabriel didn't mind. He wasn't trying to be remembered. He was just answering the questions while they were still fresh in someone's mind. "Would you have kept him, if you could?" Callum asked. Gabriel paused, then answered honestly. "No, I would have kept a version of him that never existed, one that needed me forever. But that's not what lions are made for." That night, Gabriel watched the stars again. One by one, they returned to their place in the sky, like they always did. The next morning brought something unexpected. A trail cam pinged with new motion, camera 11, out past the boundary zone where wild herds passed only during the driest parts of the year. The footage was short. Blurry at first due to wind, then clear. A lion. Not just any lion. Ghost. Older now, fully grown. His mane was still patchy in parts, but fuller, darker. He walked slowly through the clearing, nose to the wind. Behind him, 2 smaller lions followed, cubs, maybe a year old, moving carefully, always glancing his way. He paused at the edge of the frame, lifted his head, looked straight into the camera, and then, with a slow, deliberate blink, he turned and walked out of sight. Gabriel sat for a long time after watching the footage. He didn't replay it. He didn't need to. He knew that look, that pause, that blink. It wasn't recognition. It was farewell. The kind of quiet acknowledgment passed from one life to another when no more words are needed. He walked outside. The sun was already high. Zara waved from the southern fence, adjusting a solar panel. Birds sang from the scrub. The wind whispered across the dirt trail. Gabriel walked to the door of the treatment room. The cot was still there. The old blanket, too. He sat down, pulled open the bottom drawer of the steel cabinet, and took out the object he had been avoiding for months. A worn leather collar. He had made it himself during Ghost's recovery, reinforced with soft lining, designed to monitor vitals, not to restrain. Ghost never wore it long. It irritated him. But Gabriel kept it anyway, even after the cub grew too large. He carried it outside, hung it on the old nail beside the front gate, just above the worn sign that read, Station 14, Wildlife Research Zone. Visitors rarely noticed the collar. It blended into the background, weathered and quiet. But for those who looked closely, it said everything that mattered. That he had been here, that he had mattered, that he had gone forward. Weeks passed. The story of Ghost spread quietly through wildlife circles. Footage of him leading young lions, sleeping beside injured cubs, defending the waterhole from hyenas. Tour guides spoke of a lion with a strange stillness in his eyes, as if he remembered something the others never knew. They didn't call him Ghost. They didn't know that name. But Gabriel didn't need them to. He already knew what they didn't. The best kind of fatherhood is the kind no one recognizes from a distance. It's invisible, quiet, unnamed, but it stays. In the way someone learns to stand, in the way they walk forward, no longer behind. Gabriel spent the last of that season in the field, monitoring migration patterns, mentoring younger researchers, occasionally fixing busted antennae with tools older than most of the students who visited. At night sometimes he dreamed of fire, of ash, of a fragile heartbeat pressed against his chest. But mostly he dreamed of space, of wide sky, of golden plains, and of a lion no longer waiting, because the journey they had started together had always meant arriving alone, and somehow that was the whole point.